Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. All right, so welcome everybody to today's Harvard Food Systems Initiative panel. Harvard Food Systems Initiative is an educational and experiential program to inspire elevated thinking and change to shape future food system leaders for a more sustainable future. For students, with students, led by Harvard University Dining Services, in collaboration with Harvard faculty and practitioners in the field, HFSI intends to drive knowledge and experience in pursuit of food system citizenship. Today, we're excited to host 3 Harvard Law School students who will share their specific interests in food and law, how they became interested in these topics, and some of the career opportunities available to those who have similar interests. So we're pleased to welcome our panelists. We have Sophie DeBode from the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. We have Arlene Lopez from the Harvard Animal Law and Policy Clinic. And we have Kipper Berven from the Harvard Environmental Law and Policy Clinic. Students will be prompted by Anita Chandraha, a Harvard GSAS student and Food Literacy Project Fellow. We will also welcome questions from the audience in person, as well as on Zoom. So I'm going to ask Anita to come up here. We'll actually start by having all the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'll give you a little intro on my interest in food, what I do at the Food Law Clinic, and what I'm up to. So my interest in food started in undergrad. I was working over the summer at a vertical farm in New Jersey, and I learned a lot about sustainability and food and some of the issues in that space. And then after working there during undergrad, I worked for a meal kit company in New York and saw kind of the industry side of the food system a bit more, became really interested in issues of food waste, which was a big thing basically in the company that I was working at. And then decided that I wanted to learn more about food waste and food policy, which is when I decided I was going to apply to law school. So in between then, I worked at the food bank doing research on food waste and food policy, but then came to law school, very sure that I wanted to do food work, food waste work, and work with the Food Law Clinic, but not super sure about like what else there was to do at law school about food, and have kind of learned over the 3 years through new food and drug and food classes, and working at the clinic for 5 semesters, kind of what that looks like. At the Food Law Clinic, we do a ton of different work covering a lot of different areas. I focus mostly on food waste. So I work on our Food Donation Atlas project, which is a big project, and then our federal food waste and state and local food waste teams. And I'm happy to talk more about like specifically what we do on these projects, but an overview of the areas I work in. I'm also a member of the Food Law Society, which does like different speakers on food issues. And let's see, my first summer as a law student, I worked at the Department of Agriculture, which was a really interesting way to see kind of the regulatory sphere and what like administrative law looks like related to food. And then I went to a law firm last summer that has an FDA practice, and that's what I'm doing after law school. So I'm going to stay in the food realm, but kind of in a different space than when I started. And yeah, happy to answer questions on any of that.
So hi everyone, I'm Arlene. I'm a 3rd-year law student, and I'm in the Animal Law Clinic and also for the Animal Law Society. Unlike Sophie, I actually got into the GA 1968 for undergrad. I was in political science, my master's in international relations, and even going to law school, I actually started out with international development. So I had a job at the World Bank, at the UN Office of Project Services. And it wasn't really until my 2nd year that my interest in animal law and in food really started peaking. It kind of started with a few years before that. I had gotten interested in changing up my diet and lifestyle. And at some point, through a lot of learning, I ended up becoming a vegan for ethical reasons. And it was during my time at the law school that I started realizing just how much work was left to be done if we were to promote animal rights. And I saw one of, at least one way to do so, and one interesting way to do so would be through food. And so I first enrolled in an animal law course with Kristen Still at the law school, who's a director of the animal law policy program. And from there, I just fell in love. Ended up in the clinic. I'm in my second semester of that. I had a teaching on animal law. And I joined the Animal Law Society as an e-board member, and as the campus advocacy chair, through which I've been working on a lot of different initiatives. Some of which have been bringing meatless Wednesdays or plant positive Wednesdays in conjunction with the Harvard Food Systems Initiative and Harvard University Dining Services to the law school. And I'm currently working on bringing a plant-based food festival to campus at Harvard University. You all will be invited to that as well at the end of March. And after I graduated, I plan so far to go to corporate law, transactional law. But the way that I see myself staying in this space is I'm working on building or forming an impact fund that would be investing in plant-based foods and innovations. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. I think definitely with the legal field, you have a lot of options. Sometimes it's very much the traditional option is being a lawyer, and sometimes it's the option of using the skills that are very transferable in terms of understanding rules and organizations and systems and being able to use that knowledge to affect change in the way that we see that.
Sorry. Hey everyone, my name is Kipper Berven. I am a second-year law student from the Bay Area. I feel like I inhabit a little bit of a middle ground between Sophie and Arlene, where I'm only now really starting to delve deep into food law and policy, but I count myself as very fortunate to have had a lot of experiences from high school onwards that have had a strong nexus into food law and policy. And it's only now that I'm kind of realizing, oh wait, these are actually some interesting areas of interest that I really like to learn more about. Because I am a co-president of the Environmental Law Society. Last semester I was in the Environmental Law and Policy Clinic. This semester I'm working in the Food Law and Policy Clinic. And so I kind of came to it from a lens of environmental policy and sustainability. So in high school, we had a pretty amazing food waste program, and so I kind of started getting to learn about that a little bit and did a project on aquaponics and urban aquaponics. And then in undergraduate, I went to UC Berkeley and I studied environmental science and environmental economics. And I had a really fortunate opportunity to do research with a professor for the Berkeley Urban Bee Lab, which was basically looking at how to reintroduce native insect pollinators to California farmland and to kind of alleviate some of the burden on European honeybees. And so that was a really fantastic 2-year research project, and that really kind of opened my eyes to the food law and policy space and to the many different environmental and social impacts of conventional farming. And so then coming to law school, or before coming to law school, I was going to go straight through after graduating undergrad. COVID hit, I decided to defer for a year. And for a few months, I worked on an organic dairy farm, just kind of knowing that I had this interest in food and I would love to pursue it more at law school. My first year, I got to take a reading group with the director of the Food Law and Policy Clinic, Food Systems in America, and then been doing some research with her and have kind of been pursuing the overlap between environmental law, environmental policy, food law, and food systems. And so currently I'm working on the Farm Bill Law Enterprise. The Farm Bill is a piece of omnibus legislation that comes out that goes through every 5 years and essentially dictates much of food policy in the United States. And so we're kind of looking at different ways to integrate sustainability and sustainable farming practices into the Farm Bill.
So I was wondering if each of you could give an overview of your clinics and potentially ways that students can start looking into which aspects of interest in.
Yeah, so I'm gonna break this out. The Food Law Clinic does a bunch of different work on a bunch of different scales. So we do a lot of like local level work, also statewide. nationwide, like the Farm Bill projects, and then even international. We do work across like a whole bunch of different areas. The 4 primary focus areas are sustainable and equitable food production, community-led food system change, food access and nutrition, and then food waste and food recovery. And across each of those areas, there's like many different projects and different teams working on different things. Every semester, the work that we do will change. So I've been on the food waste teams, the Better Food Waste team now for 4 semesters. And every semester we're doing something different. This semester we're working on the Farm Bill, but food waste specific sections a lot, which is we're just talking about, but like specifically policies that can be added to reduce food waste, which I think is so cool and really interesting. We also last semester made a state toolkit about reducing food waste on state levels. So that was like a lot of drafting, a lot of research, a lot of working with our partners. We worked on the NRDC, the WWF, refed. It's really interesting, and like you kind of exercise a variety of skills. I've learned like so much working at the clinic. And I know different students have had like very different experiences. I've stayed very far away from like heavy litigation related work, but other students love that, and they do like rights litigation, but related to like the USDA, and it's like super different from anything I work on. But every week we have rounds in the clinic, and people go over the projects that they're working on, and they give you a brief overview, and it's great because I get to learn about what everyone else is doing, but I can still stay at the little food waste circle, which I love. And the way that you get involved in projects when at the clinic, I know we asked about this briefly, I'm not sure for the other clinics, but basically at the beginning of the semester, they'll send out a list of the topics and the different projects and like what you might expect if you're on a certain team, and you end up ranking the projects that you want on. And I think people generally get what they are looking for, which is great. It's a pretty small clinic. I think it's really top to 13 students. So it's a lot of like very hands-on work with small teams, which is fantastic. And if you're interested in learning now about like the different work that the food clinic is doing, there's so much on our website. It's under the Sophie Center for Health Law and Policy. I don't know what the I is. Innovation. There we go. But there's a ton of information there, and then you can read all the guides we produce. There's a lot of blogs about like what's going on recently, different legislation we've been working on, and yeah. Yes.
Well, the animal law clinic. So we cover things both inside and outside of food. We cover both captive and non-captive animals. So when you think of non-captive animals, you're thinking of wildlife, which would be a bigger intersection of the environmental law. But for the captive animals, it can vary from things like from animals like horses to animals like chickens and how they're regulated, or cows or pigs. And the projects that we work on, they definitely range. Some of it is very much litigation, so things that go to the court. Some of it is policy making, or but essentially lobbying for laws. And some of it is rulemaking. So a lot of agencies like the USDA or the FDA, they put out rules, but those rules can be challenged, or especially even before the rules are final, the public is allowed to comment on it under different acts, which is like the AP or the Administrative Procedure Act. And so pretty much we students can be put on a range of work, and similar to the way the food law clinic operates, instead of having like a rank of 1, 2, 3, it's kind of like a scale. You have all these projects at the beginning of the semester, and you can, rank the projects you really love as like 5-star, and you can rank the ones that you're kind of like 3, and the ones that you really know you're not interested in as 1. To talk about the way that some of the animal law projects might intersect with the food law system, or with like food systems, is I'll bring up a few cases. One that's really I think relevant right now is Prop 12. That's a ballot initiative in California, and it was meant to raise welfare standards for pigs, but and it pretty much made it so that any pigs that were raised under certain confinement standards could not be sold within the state of California, or any meat that came from pigs that did not fit those confinement standards. And that ended up being challenged at a constitutional level, because of like interstate commerce and whatnot. But it's now at the Supreme Court, and we're hearing about it recently, and the law clinic, the animal law clinic, ended up contributing by submitting amicus briefs. And I think our amicus briefs more specifically focus on the more specific horrors that these pigs had to endure. There were pictures, there were, more details of what is it that, what is it that these, this proposition or this ballot initiative was aiming to fight, that was making the Californian population so uncomfortable with buying that sort of meat. Other things that we're working on right now, for example, one project I'm on is the USDA is passing, after a solid like 10 or 15 years after they were supposed to, a new rules on how chickens are supposed to be treated. And as part of that rule, any rules that they make final, they're supposed to be well reasoned, and if they are deemed to be arbitrary and capricious, then they can be struck down by a court. And so they've currently released the proposed rule and the reasoning behind it, including all the different comments that the public has made. I think it was something like 19,000 comments, so it can be pretty extensive. But I'm currently working on reading through it and viewing what rules did they decide, what from the public comments did they decide to include, what did they decide not to include, and what was their reasoning for it, and seeing is there any sort of faulty reasoning going behind this, that if somebody were to challenge this in court, we can then have it, in one beautiful document ready to bring out and ready for litigation. There's a big range, I'll say.
Awesome. I think before I dive into the environmental law clinic, I'm just going to make sure we're all on the same page of what a clinic actually is, and kind of help me forever to starting out. Clinics are essentially like experiential learning opportunities where we can be kind of baby lawyers under the supervision of actual practicing attorneys who have had a lot of amazing experience in the field. And so this can look like sometimes different organizations will come in and request some legal research or some legal advocacy on a certain area. So in the environmental law clinic, the city of Boston is a big partner of the clinic, and will often say, hey, we're trying to find out how to decarbonize some of our city's buildings or some of our residential buildings. Like, how can we make fair, equitable, and legally sound kind of natural gas bans or electric, solar panel incentives? Or so that's kind of other organizations coming in and requesting assistance. Another way that looks is us kind of our own initiative going out and commenting or advocating for different policy changes at state or federal level. So like Sophie and Arlene said, that can look like amicus briefs, or that can look like any number of things. So for the environmental law clinic specifically, there's in-house and out-of-house clinics, or out-of-house kind of placements. So during the Trump administration, a lot of the in-house clinical work looked like just opposing the Trump rollbacks to environmental laws. Now that we are out of that, it's a much more fun place to be working. So there's kind of a really wide range of environmental projects that the clinic works on. Sean Goho, who was the former clinical instructor, had a lot of experience in clean air and kind of industrial sector emissions. So there's a lot of work on reducing methane mercury emissions, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the building sector, and some kind of zoning and environmental justice, and kind of relative to some food law and policy. There have been projects on increasing carbon sequestration in working lands and natural lands, and dam removal and kind of tribal water rights. And so that's all kind of in-house projects where the clinic generates the contacts and the connections, and students are kind of placed and work on those projects. And then while I was in the environmental law clinic, I was doing an out-of-house clinic, which I was working with Earth Justice, their sustainable food farming team. And so that basically just allowed me to extern with Earth Justice and get academic credit for my work. And so just quickly on the sustainable food farming team. So Earth Justice is one of the kind of premier environmental nonprofit law firms. And there are two main areas of work, at least the two main areas of work that I did while I was there, was one, fighting for protection for farm workers exposed to pesticides and other kind of industrial chemical additives. And then two, petitioning the EPA to regulate CAFOs and CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operations, And some of the waste, animal waste that comes from those and pollutes water, pollutes the air, pollutes communities. It's pretty gross stuff, and it is unregulated under the Clean Water Act, in most cases, even though it really should be.
Those are really helpful with you, and I also appreciate going into what it is as a background. So how can non-law school students, undergraduate and graduate students be involved in it, and also for students, what other things outside of academics are the students?
So I'm not sure undergrads, but we always have like other grad students working at the food law clinic from like public medical school. We had a med student last semester, I did that time, it was crazy. And I'm not sure where else, but we always have like other students from across the university working at the clinic. So if you are pursuing a different degree that you're interested in working at the clinic, that's definitely possible. And then I guess, I don't know, do you guys have like the opportunity? Oh, across campus,
Yeah.
like there's always a ton of like events that I assume are open to non-law students, yeah. Yeah, we always have like speakers, we had one yesterday actually, but I'm sure there will be more soon, so we're always welcome to attend those. We have like a listserv from Food Law Society as well as like the Food Law Clinic and like the clinic itself, not for the students, but we'll send out like updates on their events, so if you sign up for those, you'll know when, where to be.
Yeah, I'll say in terms of how undergrads can be involved in clinics. I don't know for sure of the opportunity that do exist. I've not seen undergrads, so I will say my roommate is doing a research project on how to get undergrads involved in the clinics. And I know that the admissions teams, when they were speaking about it, were really excited about it. And it's happened at other schools like at Berkeley, so I don't think it's impossible, but I would say I would probably reach out to clinical directors and see if there's a way to serve, because it is possible. I don't know about it in school, but that's what I'm thinking for clinics. For other ways to get involved, I'm going to say, I think the easiest and most structured way is probably through your student organizations. For example, through the Animal Law Society, right now I'm directly working with the animal advocates on the undergrad campus, as well as the Harvard Plant Future Initiative on the undergrad campus. And they're helping a lot with our campaign for ending primate testing on campus, as well as with planning this food festival. And I will say for how to get involved, and so, you know, one, if you are part or if you're involved in your, you know, expected student work undergrad, like as undergrads, like I would say reach out and try and form community with the other like-minded student orgs at the other, whether at the law school, at the med school, whatever student orgs you see that you could potentially collaborate with. I think that's an amazing opportunity, and it's also a great way to spread any sort of news that's going around. And two, sometimes like I don't think you don't always having a student or having an organization is helpful, but you can also do things with your own initiative. When I first started campaigning to end, or to start rather, a meatless day in the cafeteria, I did that in my capacity as an individual. I arranged meetings with my administration. And then I think also other ways are just I had my thought and I lost it, but if I come back to it, I will tell you. Go for it.
See, I think the bad news is that I feel like most kind of clinical work that we described is probably undergraduate students, but the good news is that I say a lot of the clinics, the Farm Law Enterprise, the Food Law Clinic and the Farm Law Clinic have pretty active blogs of what they're doing in news posts, and I think they're always looking for more people to write those, and that's, you know, I think anyone can write those and do a little bit of research. And if you do want to go to grad school and get involved in these clinics, then blog posts like that is probably a great thing to put on your application. And then ways to get involved outside of clinics. In the environmental law space, I think, or just in the environmental space generally, I think that there is increasingly a lot of cross-campus connections. So I don't know if you all are aware of the Slaughter Institute that just was created these past few years, but that is really trying to form a lot of cross-campus connections, and especially involving undergrads in that research and in that work. At the law school, there's the Environmental and Energy Law program, and that kind of operates like a think tank, an environmental think tank within the law school. And they have some amazing attorneys who also will publish and write a lot of work. They'll track different bills and regulations and litigation relating to some kind of cornerstone environmental laws. And, you know, it's not something that you need to be a law student to do. I think these are opportunities they probably would prefer law students to do. I bet if you reached out and said, hey, I've got a really cool project I want to write on, can I get supervised for this? Or I'd love to work on Tracker. I think that, you know, showing that initiative is amazing. And especially with a bunch of working law students, I think everyone would appreciate if someone from the undergrad wanted to take some time to work on these issues.
Yeah, and on that taking initiative part, I remembered my thought, which was, even within the organizations that do exist, there are still opportunities to communicate. So for the Animal Law Society, we have all these ideas, and I was like, is anyone working on this? And they were like, no. And so they really created a board position for me, the campus advocacy chair, to do that sort of work. And through that, I was able to get a committee together of like a solid like 6 other students. And so that's just different examples of how, like, you know, by being proactive, by reaching out to people, you'll find opportunities that you'll find or even create opportunities that you didn't know existed.
And I think just one more note on getting involved with student organizations and what you mentioned. I think that all our organizations have newsletters, which are pretty valuable resources for just condensing all the different events that are happening on the law school campus and in other grad school campuses or even in undergrad. And like for the Environmental Society specifically, we got involved with Harvard Divest in the past. And I think we're really actively trying to get more involved with the undergrads and with you all. And I think that also getting involved with these groups, I think we bring a fresh perspective on issues that we could be working on or stuff that we're overlooking. And I think that you would be immensely valuable if you want to participate in these organizations and stuff like that.
Also, all the like professors and clinical instructors at the clinics have like projects they're working on too. And like, I obviously can't speak for individual professors or instructors, but like, I have a feeling if you reached out to them and you were like, hi, are you working on anything that you would like assistance with? Like, they're always looking for RAs. I think you would be received positively, but that would just be like a full email. So.
Definitely, full emails or any kind of initiative is relevant to getting experience, even if you don't have that expertise. That's what I'm hearing. And so on that note, is there a disadvantage on starting late in terms of your journey and either food, animal, or environmental law?
I'm the one who started late compared to everyone here. So I will say, you know, I think that I don't think that there's like this like massive disadvantage starting late. I think that if the sooner you start, the sooner that you know what you want to do, the more you can kind of start looking into the sorts of differences between like the more nuanced differences between the different practices, the practice areas that you may be interested in. But I think when I think for myself, at least, I know that running through every other idea that I had, I was like, is this something that I could see myself doing? Trying it out and coming to the conclusion, this is not for me. I think that was really helpful to coming to the conclusion that for me and for my future, animal advocacy is where I see myself. And specifically animal advocacy as it relates to food. So I think everyone might have their, you know, everyone has their own path, and some people have known since they were like 5 years old that this is what they wanted to do, and other people are closer to me where they have to get into the place and actually start trying the things that they thought they wanted to do in order to figure out this isn't it, and but I actually prefer to do something different.
I agree with that. I don't think that you need to know now if you want to do something. I think that whatever you're working on, whatever you're doing, if you're learning more about yourself and what you want to do, and like even for law school, if that's something you've been thinking about, like, I had no idea I was going to law school until I like decided like a few months before applying. Like it was not something I was going to consider college. I did not want to. But here we are. So I don't think it's like you want to plan it out and you didn't do law, whatever it's like game over. Like you're figuring things out.
Yeah, I'll second that. If you told me my freshman year of college that I was going to go to law school, I would believe it. I didn't really kind of think of law school seriously until my junior, maybe end of sophomore year. And I think just outside of law school and outside of the food law clinic, I think that whatever you find that you're suddenly passionate about, that there will always be opportunities for you to kind of seek it out. And it might take time, it might take a lot of cold emails you don't get responded to, a lot of just like hours in the Google machine trying to find who's working in what areas. But you know, as far as my experience, like I didn't have a lot of food specific, food law and policy specific areas, but I've found it incredibly easy and welcoming to start working in the food law clinic. In the environmental area, that's kind of why I'm in law school. Like I definitely had a lot of experience going into that, but I think that I'm unique in that. And I think a lot of people, like that's kind of the blessing and the curse of these areas of interest we're working on, is that there are a lot of problems with not many people working on them, and there will always be space for you to plug in and be valuable and be important and learn from amazing practitioners. So I think that applies to animal law, food law, environmental law, equally.
And building on that, do you have any other avenues that you can get a career in these respective law fields? Whether it's food, animal, or law.
Short answer is yes. Long answer is
Yeah, I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, there is a lot of opportunities in law when you start with that, right? You can be on the government regulatory side, you can be with the USDA, with the FDA, right? You can be on the nonprofit side. So you might be working for PETA, I don't know what food organizations are, but food nonprofit. You might be, in fact, really influential person here. You might be at a big law firm and doing pro bono work and using those connections to help out in ways you fit. So there's a partner at Milbank who is essentially responsible for securing Harvard Law School's one of their biggest donations in its history to the annual law and policy program. And he does that as a big law lawyer. It's a corporate lawyer. So, and there's another person I know, her name's Aileen, who we spoke about earlier, she essentially, she founded her own nonprofit. It's called Legal Impact for Chickens. And she was able to utilize one of the seed grants that came out of the law school. And there's seed grants all over the university, by the way. The food festival is being paid for by 2 different seed grants. So was able to utilize one of the seed grants in order to start her nonprofit and build it from there. So there's a lot of avenues to go. And even if you don't go the Google route, like I see myself, I don't see myself going here, I see myself going more towards the finance route. I think it's just a matter of how you decide you want to use those legal skills. I mean, you know, I think Harvard Law School, obviously it's known for producing lawyers, but another example is it's known for producing politicians, including people like Barack Obama, or if you want to go the other way, you have Ted Cruz. The point is that the skills are really transferable, and I think the JD, it's a degree that gives you a lot of opportunity, just depends on what you decide you ultimately want to pursue.
And I don't know if you're all interested in law school. If you're not, like you can still be very involved in these issues. Like I think at least with Food Law Canada, we do a lot of work with like policy people. So we work with people like on the Hill, a lot of like legislative assistants for people, senators, and like it's like they don't have law degrees and they're absolutely doing this work and like having a very big impact. So like this is one route, but that's another route. There are really cool companies that are doing work in all of these spaces. They're like very cool startups, super interesting. Like if you're interested in being like at a smaller company, not as a lawyer, like obviously there's legal roles at those companies too, but I think this is like one route, but that is absolutely not to say that like this is the only way to be involved in food policy issues and environmental issues.
Yeah, I think that these are inherently kind of multidisciplinary issues that touch on every aspect of our like food and the environment and our interactions with other sentient creatures. It's something that we all experience and interact with every day, whether we know it or not. And so I think there's so many areas to plug in and work in. And even if you kind of choose that you want to go into some career path that has nothing to do, you think, with some of these issues, I think there's still ways to advocate and work for some of the issues. So I'll just say, like, I know we talked about, working for staffers or elected representatives or running for office yourself or being a policy consultant or lobbying. And I just want to emphasize that can happen at the federal level, that can happen at the state level, that can happen at the local county level. Like there's any different number of ways and opportunities to get involved in kind of law and policy that way, even without a law degree per se. And I think thinking about my time working with Earth Justice, to be able to bring a kind of valid legal claim, you're not just working on some of the legal issues, you're also looking at some of the science, you're looking at some of the economics of some of the work that you're presenting, the ideas you're presenting. Like there's any number of different ways to work in changing law and policy, but with a different skill set that isn't necessarily political. And so I think that we can, like, if you went home now and took out a piece of paper and wrote down your strengths and your interests and where you want to apply those, there's any number of pathways to make that happen and have an amazing career.
So how do you think about the overlap between food, animal, and environmental laws? As a diagram, where are the sections? What made you choose your lab?
I think that they are super overlapping. I would say like there are aspects of each that are very else. Like I think like food access falls more for me and the food policy around it, that's a little bit environmental, but like food waste is a huge environmental issue. I think it's honestly hard to like distinguish them. I think the different clinics take different areas that they focus on more, but like that's not to say that like the food waste research, everything we cite is like backed by environmental science, and like that's also what we're focusing on. So, whatever like topic area we're interested in, I think you'll find that there's like a bigger connection to one group. Maybe, I don't know, Kipper's done both now, so like I feel like there's not even really a dividing line, it's just like whatever you're interested in and wherever they're doing that work. I don't think there's like a real need to like even distinguish between the types of things overlap a lot.
Oh, wow, that was a question. If you wanted to build up anything I mentioned, so definitely expect
I'll second that. I think whether you choose environmental law, food law, or animal law, I think it has to do with what motivates you. Because I think that you can make just as big of an impact in food law as you can in your animal law, as you can in environmental law. But it depends, what is it that you specifically care about? Do you care about how the animals that eventually become your food or your food byproducts? Do you care about how they're treated? Do you care about the environment or the surrounding communities and how waste from those farms, how they affect and impact those communities, or maybe even the laborers who are who are working on this farm, how they're impacted? Do you care about the emissions that come from these farms, right? I think that it's really just a matter of what is it that motivates you and makes you, so to speak, feel alive when you're doing the work, rather than just what somebody else has told you, this is the right way to do things, this is the right avenue to take. I think that only you can come to that conclusion because there's so many different ways to make change, but if you're not happy in the work that you're doing, if you feel like there's no meaning to it, I think it's so easy to get burnt out and to feel demotivated and to feel like the issues that you're tackling are just insurmountable and that there's not even a point in trying. I have met people, at least in animal law, they're litigators. They have been litigators for the past 30, 40 years and they're still fighting and getting some battles. I'm hoping that will be the case 30 or 40 years from now, but that's just the reality of the sort of situation that we're in when it comes to animals, the environment, and food, and the different sort of stakeholders that are impacted by just the current practices that we have going on and the regulations that enable these practices to continue to persist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not much more to add. I think that you guys hit on it immensely. I think just like maybe looking at the case study, like so as far as within the environmental and the overlap, like there is a very strong overlap and very fuzzy boundaries between the two. I think that farming and agriculture accounts for anywhere from kind of 16 to 24% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, which is a huge percentage. I think when people are talking about climate mitigation and GHG reductions. They're only focusing on transportation, energy, and residential buildings, and agriculture farming is always kind of left out of that. And in general, environmental law, farming always kind of gets either implicit or explicit exceptions to any of the regulations, which is bizarre. And I think that right now we're seeing this turning point of actually really realizing that farming is a huge environmental kind of villain in many ways, but also can be a huge proponent of valuable change. Farming also accounts for 50% of our habitable land use, or 70% of our freshwater use. And conventional farming practices lead to immense amounts of pollution of air, water, and soils. So I guess like if you look at your conventional farm, not only is it displacing habitat and species in the wild, what was the term called? Like unprotected?
Oh, captive and non-captive.
Yeah, so non-captive animals are and some of the pollution impacts freshwater ecosystems, and then also for captive animals, obviously farming has a huge nexus and some of the environmental implications. And I don't know if that was a helpful answer, or I just repeated what you all said.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, think about it, like farming, at least like farming right now is destroying the Amazon rainforest. It's responsible for deforestation, for like loss of like biodiversity. So whichever way you cut it, all environment, animal, and food, they're all related. It's just a matter of what stakeholders are most concerned. And that's, I feel like what these is really described. Are you concerned with the animals? Are you concerned with the laborers? Are you concerned with surrounding communities? Are you concerned with the global planet? Who do you care about?
I think that brings a point. Kind of, I think when the question was about Venn diagrams, I think that it's really tempting to think of it as a really separate, neat Venn diagram, but it's kind of just this amorphous blob of a lot of overlaps and a lot of different ways it connects. And so it's not so much about where are these separate distinct rings in the Venn diagram, but it's kind of which area do you approach the blob from, and what's the lens through which you apply your work to. And I was going to say something. Yeah.
You mentioned it, so I'm going to give a heads up to the audience and we'll take questions soon, so start thinking about what you might want to ask. And my next question for you all is, how do food systems overlap with environmental use?
Yeah, so before diving into that, I'm going to add a quick what I got is just if you look at any biodiversity metrics or species, endangered species, some of their greatest risks are habitat loss due to farming primarily. Also, if you look at project drawdown, the top two drawdown metrics with the most scenario one greenhouse gas reductions are eating a plant-based diet and reducing food waste. So like that environmental food waste nexus is gone. And then as far as environmental justice, I think, I think that climate change is kind of an environmental injustice multiplier. And so as we're seeing the climate impact farming and food systems, we're going to see that any number of those impacts falls disproportionately on environmental justice communities of color, and poor communities around the world. And I think if we look at our current food system, at each step, our system is designed to bring us inexpensive food to the consumer, and I would argue to also bring a lot of money to the large agribusinesses. And so at each step, the people who help to get that food from the land to our supermarket and to our plate are experiencing crazy levels of injustices. So let's say like farmers and farm workers are exposed to immense pesticides and pesticide exposure. There's any number of cases being brought for health impacts and health degradation from pesticide exposure for cattle or food processing. I think line speeds are so fast that many workers in food processing have acute or chronic tissue degeneration diseases. They injure themselves. They're often kind of oppressed from being able to bring claims in and get workers' compensation. There's kind of rampant wage theft throughout the industry. Service workers without food service workers in 43 states are paid below minimum wage and are have to make up a living wage from tips. And this leads to kind of I think there's a statistic that in states that have sub-minimum wage for service workers, there's 3 times the instances of sexual harassment. It's an inhuman wage and it leads to exploitation from managers. So like, again, in every sector, there's injustice that is coming from the surrounding environment and the way that our system is structured.
I think what Kipper you're really getting to is like environmental, food, animal justice. It is social justice. Like all of these areas impact humans, and you spoke right about like the laborers and like the physical sort of conditions that they're subjected to, the economic conditions, right? Like underlying all of it are also racial implications, right? The surrounding communities for the Cape and the concentrated family food operation, but we know it's factory farms are disproportionately Black and Latin communities, right? When you look at Black and Latin communities in terms of their health, they're the ones that experience the highest rates of heart disease, of high rates of cholesterol, diabetes. Like you have all these sorts of issues. When you look at who are the people who are working in these factories, again, most of them tend to be not only Latin, like Latino laborers, but they're undocumented immigrants. There's a case that recently came up that there was a company that was the one who was cleaning or either cleaning or hiring the people that clean the factory farms, and they were hiring children. So these are so connected, and these are really social justice issues, and I don't think that they should be separated or siloed as if they're separate issues, because they're not. There's just so much overlap, and I think you put it really well. It's not a Venn diagram, it's a blob of issues, and what part of the blob do you want to approach?
Yeah, I feel like you guys really covered it. I don't have more to add there, but.
I would say like I kind of talk about different stages of the production of food, but also in the consumption of food. Actual access to nutritious and helpful foods is hugely disproportionately allocated, and communities of color really struggle with food deserts in many cities and access to nutritious and affordable foods.
So definitely there's a huge impact here about our human and social impact issues and these areas. And so I wanted to have this last question of what are some resources that students can start looking into if they are interested in these law areas or how they intersect with social justice.
Yeah, I think that the materials that the clinics put out, not just circle back to the clinics, but I think that they're really helpful and really digestible. Like they're written by law students, so like they're written by students most of the time, and it's like I think they cover like a wide variety of different topic areas, and I think like other groups to look at, maybe like nonprofits. I think if the NRDC does a lot of food waste work and some other like food areas and like environmental areas that overlap with food, so I think like that's a good resource. Like WWF also does, so basically just like look at nonprofits who do any food work in this space, and there's like they're constantly putting out like blog posts and toolkits and reading materials and everything, and if you like kind of like learn about it instead today, I would like to check those out.
I would to add to that, I think a few reasons I'm thinking of are people. Talk to people in those clinics, talk to people in the student organizations, talk to the professors who are teaching these classes. They're going to be the ones who have, they can give you essentially a lot of this information, but in condensed form, like very easily digestible formats. And another thing that I use, and this is where I started, this is how I even got into, for me, animal law and animal rights, was Instagram, social media. I started following different channels or different pages, such as like Mercy for Animals, which is a legal rights group for animals. And they just every day there's something new going on in the news about how different animals are being treated or different way, or what's happening in the law that relates to food. So definitely also use, the things that you already use TikTok, use Instagram, whatever it is that you use. You can also try and find the influencers and resources, the nonprofits or the organizations that are kind of relevant in these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working on kind of compiling a list of some of the environmental and food law nonprofits for some of our student groups. And I think that each of the clinics publishes or has published, like within the last 5 years, these documents, these reports on careers in environmental law after the environmental law clinic or after food law. And those list a ton of different agencies, both state and federal level or nonprofits. And they're a little bit outdated, but they are a really great place to start. And I think that, something that I found really helpful was just going up and finding who's publishing some great newsletters, some great blog posts, and just staying up to date. I think the more that you really dip your toes in and start to kind of be aware of the scene, and it's kind of like drinking out of the fire hose at first. There's a lot of information, there's a lot going on all the time, especially if you're trying to focus on kind of the overlap between these three issues. But I think that the more you kind of just will start to glance at headlines and start piecing things together, that not only informs what work there might be to be doing in this space, but also who to be contacting and how to be having those conversations. And I think just one last thought is something that I love so much about the space is that it is so collaborative and so kind of collegial. I think that everyone knows that we're working for really important issues and we want to help each other out. And I think even if it doesn't benefit my career, if I know that someone is going to go and do some amazing work on protecting the environment or making a more sustainable food system, then I will do whatever I can to help them make that happen. And I feel like that applies to so many people that I've been fortunate to be in contact with. And I think it's a really great community.
Thank you. It's really insightful, and I wanted to now overcut.
Yeah, I guess this is aimed at all of you, particularly Arlene, and like your work in the animal space. And I mean, Kipper, you alluded to the social struggle of trying to have conversations with people, let alone corporations and governments regarding animal farming and agriculture contributing to climate change and things like that. So really interested in knowing more about the challenges you guys face, not only in the social space and advocating and creating conversation and energy around what you're trying to do, but also like legally, like it must be incredibly hard to get tackle space which has so protected corporations and capitalism and profits. And so how do you kind of negotiate something that's so socially charged, but also I can imagine very legally charged?
Yeah, challenges. I think that they definitely range. I think if you go to the legal one, the challenges you're gonna have everywhere. And so I feel like for me, something that I had to learn growing up is that if you want to succeed, you have to start at home. And it's by starting with the people who are around you, it's by starting with your own communities. I think especially topics around food is a very particularly difficult conversation because there's a lot of emotional ties and comfort that people have with food. And I think something to understand when we go into conversations, especially if you're trying to change people's minds. But I wouldn't even suggest that. I suggest you share your own thoughts, share why if you eat a certain way, or if you do certain practices, share why you do that. And for people, right? You don't have to argue with anyone. But I think always just think about like, what is it that people are afraid to lose? And also kind of what are the challenges that they're facing that maybe you might be able to help them overcome. And a lot of times people aren't even aware of like, I've had so many of my friends like, where can I find vegan chicken? And I'm like, let me take you to the store and I will show you where to find it. And I think to just be able to offer them an easy, normal thing rather than like something that's super foreign and for like, the rich yoga moms out of California, I think that that's something that makes, whatever you're advocating for a lot more digestible and just a lot less scary than what it just is to the normal person.
Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic question, and it's something that I don't feel like I have an answer to because it's something that I am constantly thinking about and also changing my thoughts with as time progresses. And I think that there's no kind of correct answer for how to approach things. But I will say, I think that Arlene, that's really insightful about kind of change starting at home. Personally, when I was in high school and starting undergrad, I thought that, you know, I want to use my education to have the most impact for these environmental issues that I care about. That means that I have to be at the very top, like the UNFCCC, and making all these kind of huge international sweeping climate commitments. And I really don't think that is the case anymore. I think that starting from the ground level and having a localized impact is so much more profound and also more effective. And so we can talk about kind of the litigation challenges, but I think that realizing that these institutions do favor the large corporations that are working in space, but these corporations are dependent on you and your money and you choosing to buy and all of us. And you know, I think there's any number of problems with making the environmental issues a kind of individual aspect, but I think recognizing that we as consumers hold a lot of power over those, over Tyson's, over like these kind of massive evil corporations. Like we as consumers, as collective consumers, do hold a lot of power for that. And we haven't really used it, but when we can, it's kind of cool.
It's been helpful, like, there are so many challenges, obviously, in any of these areas, but I was helpful when thinking about them is like thinking about other stakeholders and like who you can collaborate with, and like who might be kind of from a different angle, but with similar interests, and like I think there's just like power in numbers and power in like a larger community working for the same goals, even if you think you're coming at it from a different like reason that we're talking about, like everyone has a different angles, but like obviously these groups are like stronger than the.
I'll say, like, before you can pour into other people's cup, you will pour into yourself. So like, always check in with yourself and make sure that you have that capacity, because some of these issues they're really challenging, they're really big, and one person is not going to change it. It's going to have to be societal shifts in attitude. And the question of how do you start shifting people's minds, how do you start changing their perception of things.
So thank you so much by the way, for sharing all of your experiences and everything. I was wondering, have you ever encountered an issue or some sort of work where it's best to approach it from one angle, or where you feel like you have to choose one approach? Because I can imagine it's like you said, drinking out of a fire hose, where you're highlighting reasons why something is bad. For example, red meat, like I think from all of your perspectives, we can agree that red meat is bad for the environment, bad for your health, bad for animals. But, you know, depending on the stakeholder, you know, the reasoning might be different. So I'm just wondering, can you give maybe a case study or an example of something you think of?
Yeah, I mean, I've got one that is pretty hot right now. So with the Farm Law Enterprise, we're about to go to DC for resilience, and we're going to speak with some legislators on why certain climate resilient agricultural policies should come in the next Farm Bill. And so, you know, some of these senators who really care about agriculture can often come from more conservative states or have more conservative constituents. And so trying to frame environmental beneficial policies in a lens that is kind of touches more towards different ideals has been a really interesting challenge. But when you kind of realize it does, it's not like these issues have often become very politicized, and but there are so many overlapping interests of like making farms and farmers more resilient to extreme weather events and to and just making people's lives better. Because that's really what we're working on. And I think there are a lot of ways to kind of frame the benefits and frame the kind of policy mechanisms in ways that are more palatable to people who might or more kind of palatable to different people. And I think like it isn't so much the stakeholder, but the decision maker, where you sometimes need to change the way you come into these things.
Sorry, no, this is so interesting that we're not even go over time, but I want to cut it off here and thank our panelists. And then I'm sure you might give us something.
Thank you so much.